Hello students, once again it is Deepak Pokhriyal with class 12 English lesson, the fourth lesson, which is called the rat trap. In this video I am going to read out the text to my students, and because it is going to be a very long reading session, so I'll be doing it in parts. So this is the first part, the rat trap. The lesson is written by Selma Lagerlöf. She was a Swedish writer, and her stories have been translated into many languages. This story revolves around a universal theme that the essential goodness in a human being can be awakened through understanding and love. There is another important uh, thing to note in this lesson, that is human loneliness. We'll see many characters in this lesson who are suffering from human loneliness, including the protagonist. Now let us start the lesson. So once upon a time there was a man who went around selling small rat traps of wire. He made them himself at odd moments from the material he got by begging in the stores or at the big farms. But even so, the business was not especially profitable, so he had to resort to both begging and petty thievery to keep body and soul together. Even so, his clothes were in rags, his cheeks were sunken, and hunger gleamed in his eyes. So he is the protagonist, the rat trap seller. I will try to give you the meaning of the expressions which I think are difficult for you to understand. Like here, an expression is keeping body and soul together. It means the survival. So in the first paragraph we came to know that this rat trap seller, he is selling the rat traps, but he is not getting enough money to survive. So along with selling the rat traps, he is resorting to occasional thievery and begging. And still his condition is such that he is wearing rags, his cheeks were sunken, and one could easily see in his eyes that he is hungry. No one can imagine how sad and monotonous life can appear to such a vagabond. Now, vagabond again has been used for the same man. In this chapter, you will see that this protagonist, whose actual name we do not know, will be called by many names. But towards the end of the chapter, you will see that he will adopt a name for himself, and we can infer that he might have continued with the same name after that. So, vagabond has also been used for the same man. No one can imagine how sad and monotonous life can appear to such a vagabond who plods along the road left to his own meditations. But one day this man had fallen into a line of thought which really seemed to him entertaining. He had naturally been thinking of his rat traps when suddenly he was struck by the idea that the whole world about him, the whole world with its lands and seas, its cities and villages, was nothing but a big rat trap. It had never existed for any other purpose than to set baits for people. It offered riches and joys, shelter and food, heat and clothing, exactly as the rat trap offered cheese and pork. And as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed it on him. And then everything came to an end. Now, this is very interesting here, that this rat trap seller is comparing the world with a big rat trap. And as he is thinking ill of the world, it is giving him pleasure, it is giving him entertainment, because he never got a good treatment, respectable treatment from the world. So he's comparing world with the rat trap, and he's comparing the riches and comforts and joys to the bait which we put in a rat trap to attract the rats. The world had, of course, never been very kind to him, so it gave him unwanted joy to think ill of it in this way. It became a cherished pastime of his during many dreary ploddings to think of people he knew who had let themselves be caught in the dangerous snare, and of others who were still circling around the bait, snare, the tramp, the noose, and cherished pastime. He liked this, he became very fond of this thought, and often he think like this of this world. Now the turning point will come in his life where he will see that he got trapped into this big rat trap, which is the world according to him, according to his philosophy. One dark evening, as he was trudging along the road, he caught sight of a little grey cottage by the roadside, and he knocked on the door to ask shelter for the night. Nor was he refused. Instead of the sour faces which ordinarily met him, the owner, who was an old man without wife or child, was happy to get someone to talk to in his loneliness. So, one important thing is said about this rat trap peddler is that he was never welcomed by anyone before. It was the first time when he knocked on the door that an old man opened the door and he welcomed the rat trap seller. And this man who welcomed the rat trap peddler is also the victim of loneliness. So, as I told earlier, that this story also focuses, also throws light, sheds light on a very important aspect, that is human loneliness. So Crofter was lonely, he wanted someone to talk to, so he was very happy. He did not pay much attention to the appearance of the rat trap seller, that he was wearing rags, that his cheeks were sunken, that he might not be a very good fellow to be welcomed in a house. Immediately he put the porridge pot on the fire and gave him supper. Then he carved off such a big slice from his tobacco roll that it was enough both for the stranger's pipe and his own. Finally he got out an old pack of cards and played Majolis with his guest until bedtime. The old man was just as generous with his confidences as with his porridge and tobacco. The guest was informed at once that in his days of prosperity his host had been a crofter at Ramsjow Iron Works and had worked on the land. Now that he was no longer able to do any labor, it was his cow which supported him. Yes, that Bossy was extraordinary. She could give milk for the creamery every day, and last month he had received all of 30 kronor in payment. Now this word Bossy is for the cow. It is a noun, cow. Now we see another important thing here. The crofter, he was a very simple man, and he was very talkative, and in this talkativeness he is telling everything about himself to the vagabond without knowing that it might be dangerous. So he told everything. He told about the money. The stranger must have seemed incredulous, for the old man got up and went to the window, took down a leather pouch which hung on a nail in the very window frame, and picked out three wrinkled 10 kronor bills. Bills means notes. Incredulous means doubtful. Okay, credulous means when you are believing, incredulous when you are not believing. So, rat trap seller, rat trap peddler might have given the expression that he was not believing on the crofter what he was saying about the money. So, the crofter, to prove that he was telling the truth, he showed the peddler the money. These he held up before the eyes of his guest, nodding knowingly, and then stuffed them back into the pouch. So he put the money back where it was. The next day both men got up in good season, in good mood. See, good season means in good mood. The crofter was in a hurry to milk his cow, and other man probably thought he should not stay in bed when the head of the house had gotten up. They left the cottage at the same time. The crofter locked the door and put the key in his pocket. The man with the rat traps said good-bye and thank you, and thereupon each went his own way. So they parted. They came out, Crofter locked his house, and they parted on their ways. But half an hour later the rat trap peddler stood again before the door. He did not try to get in, however. He only went up to the window, smashed a pane, stuck in his hand, and got hold of the pouch with the 30 kroner. He took the money and thrust it into his own pocket. Then he hung the leather pouch very carefully back in its place and went away. So, as I said earlier, that crofter, he was a simple man. He invited danger by showing that money to the peddler, and and he paid the price. The peddler took his money, stole his money. But now, as I was telling you, this was the turning point in Rattrap Seller's life. He has invited troubles in his life by taking that money. How? We'll see in the story. As he walked along, as he walked along with the money in his pocket, he felt quite pleased with his smartness. He realized, of course, that at first he dared not continue on the public highway, but must turn off the road into the woods. During the first hours, this caused him no difficulty. Later in the day, it became worse, for it was a big and confusing forest which he had gotten into. He tried, to be sure, to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood, and finally he realized that he had only been walking around in the same part of the forest. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world and the rat trap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by a bait and had been caught. The whole forest, with its trunks and branches, its thickets and fallen logs, closed in upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. Now this is the trouble he got into. Um, to avoid any arrest, to avoid any trouble, he discontinued walking on the public highway. He entered the woods and then he was confined in it. He could not come out of it because it was a very strange wood. And now he's thinking that as he compared this world with a rat trap, so he thought that now his turn had come and he was in a trap now. And those 30 kroner, he was cursing him for getting attracted towards those 30 kroner, that money, that crofter's money. And he thought impenetrable prison means the prison which cannot be penetrated, which cannot be broken. So he was not seeing any chances of his coming out of his prison. Now let's see what happens after that. It was late in December. Darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and increased also his gloom and despair. Finally, he saw no way out, and he sank down on the ground, tired to death, thinking that his last moment had come. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a hard, regular thumping sound, regular sound like of thud, 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 as if something heavy is falling on the ground. Thud, thud. So it was the sound of the hammer. There was no doubt as to what that was. He raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from an iron mill, he thought. There must be people nearby. He summoned all his strength, got up, and staggered in the direction of the sound. Summoned all his strength. He collected all his strength. As earlier it was said that he was tired to death, he fell on the ground. But when he saw the silver lining, he thought maybe he could save his life. So he collected all his strength, he got up and staggered in the direction. Somehow he dragged himself. Now, a little description is given of the iron mill from where the sound was coming. The Ramsau Iron Works, which are now closed down, were not so long ago a large plant with smelter, rolling mill, and